Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay, we'll get started. I want to thank everyone for attending, and a very special thank you to our special guests who are also joining us this evening. You were invited because you're considered to be very important in the work that we're doing here at the Arthritis Foundation as a major donor, a leadership volunteer with an event, or as a fundraiser, or just a good friend of the foundation. During the call, I want to let you know that you can chat in the chat section of the screen, which is in the top right corner. We do ask that you unmute yourself if you're going to ask questions. However, if you're not speaking, please do mute your lines so that we don't pick up any extra background noise. So let's get started. We are going to first do a little bit of introductions, and then we'll move into the speakers. But first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name again is Rochelle Lentini. I've been volunteering with the Arthritis Foundation now for many years, really started in 2010. Michael and I have raised two young men. They're actually in their early 20s, and Logan and Parker are both going to be talked about just a little bit here. Parker is the reason our family is so committed to the Arthritis Foundation and also to CARRA, actually. Parker started showing signs of juvenile arthritis when he was about 8 years old, and he had spiking fevers, rashes, pain, and then later his joints started to swell up. Because of this, it took us about 1 year and 7 months to get a diagnosis of systemic onset juvenile arthritis. But things have drastically changed since those early years. His systemic issues with his organs have kind of gone quiet, which we're very happy about. But since then, his diagnosis has now kind of developed into some other conditions. So he also has now ankylosing spondylitis, enthesitis-related JA, and small bowel Crohn's, gastroparesis, and hypogammaglobulinemia. I'm telling you all of this because a lot of our children, as some of you know, get these overlapping conditions with their juvenile arthritis. And so we believe real wholeheartedly that both funding for a cure and helping children until that cure comes is very important. Logan, however, is my oldest son, and he has this incredible passion for children with juvenile arthritis. And because of it, he is currently the CARRA Research Coordinator at UF Shands Hospital. This journey has really led us to funding both of the Arthritis Foundation, but also starting our own nonprofit for children who have chronic illnesses and overlapping conditions. Our foundation is called the Purple Playas Foundation, and we finally named it after Parker's longtime arthritis walk team. We are currently co-funding a pediatric rheumatology fellowship in partnership with the Arthritis Foundation. So again, I thank you wholeheartedly for joining us today, and that you have decided to take time to listen about arthritis and the foundation and the scientific updates. As you know, today's topics will be the Arthritis Foundation's commitment to juvenile arthritis, and it will be presented by Dr. Emily von Scheven. And before she speaks, we have someone very special that is going to share her story, along with Maria Vasilvia and Rick Willis, who is our Senior Vice President of Community Engagement. So Abby is a young girl, Abby Ferrero is a young girl who's 12 years old, and she and her family have been very successful with their walk team called Abby's Army, and she'll be sharing her story with you. Before we begin with her story, I'm asked to just remind you one more time that this is being recorded and that there will be a link shared after today's presentation. We do remind you to mute yourself, and that way it'll minimize the background noise and everyone can hear clearly. And again, please feel free to use the chat section of your presentation screen, and we will get questions at the end, but if you have an urgent question, you can unmute yourself and ask. Also, you can jot them down on a piece of paper if you prefer that method. So I would now like to introduce Abby. Abby is 12, like I said, and she was diagnosed at about 2 years old. She and her family have a very successful walk team called Abby's Army. Her mother is my former JA committee chair and is now part of the My Network chair. Her parents started a foundation to raise money to support medical expenses for juvenile arthritis families, and they make a generous donation from the foundation to the foundation, from their foundation to the foundation and the walk each year. She is very well spoken and even has written a book called Everyone Has Something. Welcome, Abby.
Hi, my name is Abby Ferrero. I was diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis at 20 months old, diagnosed with uveitis at 7 years old, and Crohn's disease at 8 years old. I wrote and published a book at age 8. And I've been helping the Arthritis Foundation raise money during walks and doing JA conferences and helping advocate for others.
And she's kind of under the weather today, so we're going to keep it short. We apologize. We're pending a COVID test right now, so.
Thank you so much, Abby, for joining.
So again, yes, thank you, Abby. We would now like to introduce our Senior VP of Community Engagement, Rick Willis.
Well, Rochelle, thank you. And Abby, I can tell that under any circumstances, you'd be a very hard act to follow. So we wish you all the best and thank you for being with us tonight. And I hope you can see all the well wishes in the chat for you. Well, look, I don't want to take too much time. I see lots of familiar faces, faces and names, and I see some new ones as well. And certainly, again, Rochelle, I want to extend my thanks to both you and Michael and Parker and Logan for all that you've done for us over the years. And excited to get on with tonight's program. I think we've got an all-star lineup for you with, as Rochelle said, with both Maria and Emily joining us. I think I just wanted to have the opportunity to convey to everyone tonight, you know, it's really the understatement of the century to say that the last year and a half for our country, the world, our society, and certainly for our organization has been a tumultuous one. You are probably aware that we as an organization were very hard hit by COVID, and we continue. In fact, I was on a call today with representatives from the MS Society and from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia talking about how they are continuing to evolve and to refine their decision model for how we go forward, you know, from a community engagement perspective. And so we find ourselves in this last 18 months now, almost going on 2 years, I suppose, of really very turbulent times. And we've been very affected, very hard hit. But the thing I want you to know is that through it all, we had to make some very tough choices as an organization, and many of you are likely aware of those choices. But the thing that I'm very proud of, and that I hope that you are as well, is that through it all, our organization has maintained its commitment to our scientific initiatives and to furthering and advancing, you know, what we do on that front. You're going to hear more about that tonight, and I hope that you hear things that are intriguing to you. I hear things that hope you hear things that pique your interest, that you want to talk more about, because I can tell you we'd like to talk to you more about them. And so, you know, Sylvia and team will be coming back around to you for that. But I can tell you that in addition to the scientific initiatives that you're going to hear tonight, I can't help but be with you and just mention that we've continued to pivot our approach this year in terms of how we serve our JA community, either through our national conference or through pivoting our approach in terms of how we do camps. And we've certainly launched our JA Insights initiative. So there's many other things that are going on behind the scenes in addition to, and that relate to some of the scientific endeavors that you'll hear tonight. But we're very proud of our partnership with CARRA, and I've had the pleasure of knowing Emily, I think, for the entire 7 years that I've been here. And I can tell you that the thing about Emily is that not only does she bring her CARRA hat and the partnership the rich partnership that we have together with CARRA, not only does she bring that hat, but like many of you who are on the phone tonight, Emily has skin in the game. She's been a volunteer in her community for many years. She's been intimately acquainted with how we do things out on the front lines as a member of her local leadership board and other activities that she's been involved with. And so, Emily, we thank you as well for your long history of support and, again, wearing many hats in terms of how you are involved with and support and drive our work together. So again, delighted to be with you tonight. Look forward to being able to talk with you further about areas of interest that you hear that maybe pique your interest. And with that, I'll turn it over to Maria Vasilova, so our new leader of our scientific initiatives, and then she's going to pass the baton to Emily. So Maria, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Rick. And thanks everyone for attending tonight's discussion. I'm excited that I have this opportunity to share some brief highlights for our science program and our plan for the next 3 years. I am delighted to have had the opportunity to join the Arthritis Foundation team this spring. So when I became the Senior Vice President of Scientific Strategy. And tonight, if we can go to the next slide, I will be talking to you about our pathways plan. But as we all know, arthritis in its many forms has been around for thousands of years. And we're really hopeful that our scientific agenda, the Arthritis Foundation, that exists today is moving us closer to a cure for arthritis. And that's why we're excited to share some of the highlights from our new strategic plan. And as you can see on the slide, the plan really contains two paths. One focused on a pathway to a cure, and that's the part that I will be discussing tonight. And the other one focused on a pathway to improve quality of life. But of course, as we all know, and even as we already heard today, those two pathways are very closely linked. And therefore, we have to make sure that our work within those pathways remains very well integrated. And so I'm just going to be very brief, and over the next 5 minutes or so, I will focus the discussion on our pathway to a cure and really discuss with you some of our Arthritis Foundation support for the several important scientific initiatives in childhood arthritis. And then I'm going to turn it over to Emily so she can talk to you a lot more in depth about the CARRA AF collaboration and all of the research initiatives that we have on the way in childhood arthritis. But before we move to the science, I wanted to see if on the next slide, some of you will recognize this picture. As you may be guessing by the quote that I put next to it, this is the beautiful actress is Lucille Ball. But I don't know if you're aware that as a teenager, she was an aspiring model. And then the excruciating leg pain and flare-ups that she had kept her really from walking and therefore sidelined her modeling career. So she actually was thought to have juvenile arthritis, and then actually as an adult, she was diagnosed with adult rheumatoid arthritis and received treatment. So once her pain was under control, then she moved to Hollywood and became known affectionately as the First Lady of Television. So I'm sure you know her for her performances in I Love Lucy, among many other television series. But what I wanted to share with you tonight is one of the quotes that she has about her life with arthritis, and that's what I included in the slide here. She said, one of the things I learned the hard way was that it doesn't pay to get discouraged. Keeping busy and making optimism a way of life can restore your faith in yourself. So I think many of us can identify with the importance of this statement. And while Lucille Ball did not often speak publicly about her arthritis, she actually was a big supporter of the Arthritis Foundation until her death in 1989. And we are very thankful to her for her support. So with that, I'm just going to move to the next slide and just give you a very general overview of the 3-year scientific plan we have at the Arthritis Foundation now for the next 3 years. And you can see that the main focus of our research and scientific initiatives is on the 3 major therapeutic areas within arthritis, which are osteoarthritis, the most common form of arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, the most common autoimmune form of arthritis, and then juvenile arthritis, which is the childhood arthritis that we already mentioned and is the focus of tonight's discussion. So while those conditions are very different, there is something that's very common across all 3 of them, and that is the prevalence of pain in the patients and the importance of pain management. So therefore, our scientific strategy at the Arthritis Foundation will also integrate into the overall Arthritis Foundation Pain Initiative, because we understand how important pain management is for all the different types of arthritis. And just very high level, we can talk about our strategy in rheumatoid arthritis, and juvenile arthritis. So for arthritis in children is called juvenile arthritis. And there are approximately 300 children in the United States that are estimated to have some type of arthritis. And as you already heard, there are very different types of childhood arthritis. And they all cause permanent physical damage to the joints. So this type of damage can make it hard for children to do everyday things like walking or dressing, and can eventually result in disability. The good news is that although there's no cure for JA, some children with arthritis actually achieve permanent remission, which means that the disease is no longer active. But any damage on their joints that they already experienced will, when they had a prior flare, remains permanent. So there are clinical research studies in children, but as you probably know, they're not very common, and usually they result in a lot of regulatory challenges. So that is why our support for advances in childhood arthritis research are even more important than ever. And as Rick said, we have been very lucky in the JA space to have at the Arthritis Foundation a wonderful partner such as CARRA, and we're very lucky tonight to have Emily, the current president of CARRA, to talk to us more about some of their work. But before she goes into more detail, I just wanted to show you on this slide our plan for the juvenile arthritis space in the next 3 years. And to just mention at the high level that at the Arthritis Foundation, we're very committed to continue funding the CARRA Registry, which already has over 10,000 samples from children with juvenile arthritis. And we will also contribute and support the strategic design of an impactful consensus treatment plan program, which probably will first focus on JIA. So that's another very important initiative that CARRA is going to start in 2022, and we're very excited about. And we'll also continue to fund a very important milestone-based investigator-led studies in juvenile arthritis and other pediatric conditions, because as Rick said, some of those translational research fundings as well as implementational science fundings in the area of JA are very important for the improvement of outcomes in JA patients. In addition, we also plan to support workforce development programs such as early career investigator awards in 2022, because that's an area of need deemed by CARRA, and we're very excited to support young investigators and encourage them to stay focused on juvenile arthritis, because that is an area of so much need at the moment. So you can see there's a lot happening, and certainly Emily will tell you more about this. On the next slide, I just briefly wanted to mention that we also have a big focus on rheumatoid arthritis, as I mentioned early in my presentation. And in that area, we're going to focus next year on defining the strategic priorities and biggest areas of need, but also be very cognizant that there are some areas of overlap where research findings in rheumatoid arthritis may translate and be relevant to the area of juvenile arthritis, and we'll certainly be on the lookout for those and make sure that if there is any crossover, we can integrate the work streams and facilitate the use of the findings for the benefit of as many patients as possible, including younger children. So that's why I just wanted to mention this briefly on the slide. So if we can go on to the next slide. I just wanted to end my remarks with one of my favorite quotes about science by the 20th century American author Kurt Vonnegut, which says, "Science is magic that works." And I just wanted to say here that even in magic, it is important to have a solid plan. So that is why I thank you for giving me the opportunity today to share this brief summary of our scientific plan at a very high level. We definitely hope you will support our agenda as we continue our fight to conquer arthritis. And with that, I want to introduce Emily, who is the current president of CARRA and is a board-certified pediatric rheumatologist, as you heard, from UCSF, a close collaborator for the Arthritis Foundation. Emily has a special interest in the long-term outcomes of children with chronic illness. And we're really delighted to have her here so she can share a little bit more about the CARRA plans for the next year, as well as the state of research in childhood arthritis. So welcome, Emily. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria, for the introduction. It's really a pleasure to be with everyone, although I wish we were somehow in person, but that can't be right now. But I'm really happy to be able to sort of share some of the work that CARRA's been doing in partnership with the Arthritis Foundation. And I was really happy to see how you highlighted in the 3-year pathway both a focus on cure, because everybody cares about cure, but also a focus on quality of life, because science takes a long time. It takes more than magic. In the meantime, what are we doing, right, to help people? So I really like seeing that both parts were part of the 3-year pathway. Also really want to just give a shout out to Abby. I don't know, maybe we lost her. I've heard so much of her over the years in her book, and she's been such an incredible ambassador and making such a difference at a young age. I just think it's great that she's been helping with all of this. So I don't know who's advancing my slide. We can go to the next slide. So first, just a little bit about me. So as Maria said, I am a pediatric rheumatologist. I work in San Francisco at UCSF. I'm the division chief of pediatric rheumatology. So we have a whole team that covers a couple hospitals here, and I've been here since 1995. And I am also the president and a board member of CARRA, which is the research organization that Maria was mentioning, and I'm going to tell you about our work. And I've been involved with CARRA since it was founded as well. I'm also the director of a new program here at UCSF that we're developing, which is a chronic illness center for kids with all chronic illnesses. And as Rick mentioned, I'm involved locally with the Arthritis Foundation with our local board and medical and scientific committee and local events and walks and such. So I sort of feel like, you know, as a doctor who takes care of patients, you know, I wear the UCSF hat, and as a researcher, I wear the CARRA hat. And if I sort of have a home with an advocacy organization, I think that's the Arthritis Foundation. So I'm really happy to be here to be able to share with you guys what we're doing. You can go to the next slide. So I just want to start at a really high level and say a few words about nomenclature or terminology. So the word JA is really sort of an abbreviation for juvenile arthritis. And arthritis from the lens of a rheumatologist is really a process that causes inflammation in the joint. And that can be seen in a lot of different diseases. And I list some names. So juvenile idiopathic arthritis, it's actually it's not actually one disease, it's actually a grouping of multiple diseases in that category. And other conditions are listed here that you might have heard of, like lupus or dermatomyositis. But the important thing here is that the term JA, or childhood arthritis, is really not one diagnosis. It's multiple different diagnoses that fall under that category. And in some cases, lumping them together is really helpful because often they have similar features and the same medicines can be used in different conditions. But in other situations, lumping them is problematic because they also have really different features that are important to understand, both from the research perspective and if you're a patient. But we're addressing all of this with our work with CARRA. Next slide. So I don't want to shock people with these pictures, but I do want to create a picture for you of what it used to be like for these kids, because things have changed for the better. So the picture on the left is a picture from the late 1800s of a kid with systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis that was initially named Still's disease because Dr. George Frederick Still, who was this pediatrician in England, first described it. And you can see this child is very thin and very sickly looking and in bed. The other two pictures show kids who have adaptive equipment, crutches and a walker. And these children all, because of their arthritis, developed damage to their joints, and that damage led to what we call deformities or changes in terms of the way the joints functioned, which led to them having physical disability, which is what Maria was referring to as what happens if we don't do a good job treating the arthritis. And a lot of that destruction in the joint comes because of inflammation. And so a lot of our medicines are directed at getting rid of the inflammation. And this is what happens when there's no treatment. You can go to the next slide. Luckily, things are better now. I'm showing you here some pictures that actually are from Arthritis Foundation JA conferences. So on the left is, 25 years ago or something, when there were kids at the conference who had arthritis and they were often in a wheelchair or using a walker. And on the right, you can see that you can't see anything on the outside because these kids are doing so much better. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that everything's perfect on the inside, but there have been incredible advances. But most of the advances have been around preventing this disability, the destruction of the joint. And there are other advances that are still needed. Next slide. And a lot of the advances have really been attributed to a huge explosion in drug development. On the far left of this slide, you see like aspirin back in the 1900s, where that was the only medicine a doctor could give a person with arthritis. And that's not even very effective. There was a period of time when we used gold, and then the steroids were discovered in the 50s. And if you know anything about steroids, you know that in one hand, they're a wonder drug because they make you feel better. But on the other hand, they're not so great long-term, especially because they have side effects. But more recently, there's been just a tremendous explosion of medications that have really helped us improve the treatment for kids with all kinds of autoimmune diseases. And a lot of this discovery of drugs came out of understanding the immune system and being able to target the immune system with particular medications. So that's the good news. Next slide. The problem is, despite all these advances, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, right? Like, what do you do when none of these medicines work? There are kids out there for whom nothing works. which medicine is best for which person. Often patients and families feel like we're just trying one thing, then we're trying another till we figure out what's right. And if we only knew what was right from the beginning, it would be so much easier. We have questions about when should we stop medicines? Once things are going great, can you stop them? In whom is it safe to stop? In whom will things flare up in? How do we predict that? And that's an important question for us to answer. It's also important for us to answer the how safe medicines are, especially over a long period of time if kids aren't able to stop their medicine. And of course, there's this big question about why. What caused this in the beginning? And if we could only understand that, couldn't we do better? So we still need research because even though things are better, we still have a lot of questions that we need to answer. You can go to the next slide. So that's why we formed CARRA. So CARRA stands for the Childhood Arthritis and Rheumatology Research Alliance, and we're a network of pediatric rheumatologists and health professionals, all working together in partnership with the Arthritis Foundation, tackling this together, because for rare diseases, you really can't work just in one location. You need everybody working together. So that's why we formed this organization a little over 20 years ago. Next slide. So our vision for CARRA is a world free of limitations from pediatric rheumatic diseases. Our mission is to conduct research, collaborative research, aimed at prevention, treatment, and cure. And our values are inclusiveness, trust, impact, and innovation. And if you go to our website, you can learn more about what we do and how we do it. Next slide. So just a few things before I tell you about some of the research that we do. We are an investigator-led network. That's important because a lot of research is done by, especially in industry and pharmaceutical companies, is done by people who aren't also taking care of patients. Most of the researchers in CARRA are also taking care of patients or very close to people who are, so we know a lot about what the needs are. We also cover all the different conditions and we're organized according to research committees. We have a strong emphasis on patient engagement, and I'll talk to you a little bit more later about how we do that and why that's so important, but we think that makes things better. Plus, it's more fun. We have a registry, which Maria mentioned, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a minute, where we basically pool lots of information about patients in one giant database. And then we do lots of different kinds of studies that are all built on top of the registry. So that's the foundation. And out of that, we can study the natural history of disease, what happens to kids as they grow up. We can do studies of drugs. We can do translational research studies because we have biospecimens. So we collect blood and urine on our patients, and that lets us understand some of the biology of what's going on. So we have a full array of the kinds of studies that we can do with this whole system. Next slide. This just shows you that our reach is really all across the United States and into Canada at over 175 clinical sites. And almost all pediatric rheumatologists are part of this network. So this reach is important because we reach doctors, we reach researchers, and we reach patients. And that lets us have a really broad involvement of everybody who's important in getting the job done. Next slide. This just gives you a picture. You do not have to study this, but every box is either a committee or a work group of people working together virtually. We're a virtual organization on the phone, in Zoom meetings, developing research protocols, studying things, and sharing the data and publishing it. That's kind of where the work happens, in all these little groups that are working virtually that include people from all over the country together. Next slide. In terms of how we work with the Arthritis Foundation, in this pyramid, you see like these different types of research activities, like understanding diseases, developing treatments, comparing treatments to figure out what works better, implementation, personalized medicine and cure. Those are all the kinds of research activities we do that fall under discovery. But we also need to have patient involvement in order to make things really go better. And we also need knowledge translation. So as we discover things, we need people to know what's being discovered. And if you can get discovery or research and patient engagement and knowledge translation all working together in an organized way, you can really move the needle in getting things done. And that's why we work with the Arthritis Foundation, because the Arthritis Foundation as an advocacy organization can bring the patient's voice forward and can bring the reach of the organization in terms of community and dissemination of information together with the research and discovery that CARRA is doing, and we can really be stronger all together. So that's kind of how we all work together. Okay, so what's this registry? So the registry is where we enter information on patients. People sign up to enter data like every 6 months, and this graph shows you over time since 2016 how it's grown in terms of the number of people involved, and each color bar is a different kind of condition. So JIA is the most common disease, and it's the one we started with, so that's why it's the tallest bar. But as Maria mentioned, there are over 10,000 patients now all contributing their information. So this is like huge, powerful, because data is power. We now have a lot of information that we can start to study things. Next slide. So the other thing I want to just mention is this idea of the phases of drug development. So this kind of describes the entire process that starts with sort of studying how a drug could interact in our body, with the studies that expose small numbers of first healthy people and then people with disease to a new drug, all the way through to phase 3, which is where often we're doing what are called randomized controlled trials to compare some new drug to an existing drug or to placebo. And all that leads to the FDA approving the drug. And so that process has to happen for every drug I showed you on that graph in terms of developing new drugs. And then there's another phase called post-marketing surveillance, where after the drug's being used and they're just general everyday people getting the medicine, we still collect data. And that's really important because that's real patients, lots of them in the real world. And so CARRA is interested in this entire process and making sure that it's advancing for all children with rheumatic diseases. Sometimes we conduct these studies, sometimes we work with pharmaceutical companies to work with them on conducting these studies. Right now, we do that post-marketing surveillance with our registry for some of the drug companies so that we can study what happens to kids once drugs are used in the real world. And this then tells us a lot about what's going on in the real world. So next slide, I think, gives you some examples of what we've learned. So this is just some papers that were published recently on studying like how does real life treatment look like not just in the clinical trial, but real kids getting real exposure to medicines out in the world. And what we looked at is the use of these biologic agents, which are these newer drugs, and how often people switch them around and how often people use them at high doses. So that's not how they were studied, right? They were studied a particular drug with a particular dose at a particular interval. And then when it gets into practice, people start doing slightly different things sometimes, which isn't bad, but we want to study that. And we found out that about a quarter of the patients are switching from one kind of biologic to another, half the time because the first one's not working. And about 20% are taking higher dose than standard dose. So this registry allows us to look at this and to then figure out what's working. Next slide. Another example of something we're doing is this consensus treatment plan program. So that was mentioned in Maria's slide. So it turns out there's a lot of variation in how people are treated, because in many cases, it's not clear which treatment approach is best. So different providers do different things. Well, the registry is a way that we can compare these different approaches. The problem we have is that if there's too much variation, it's really tough to do the analysis. So we at CARRA said, okay, let's work on narrowing down the ways that people are treated. And that's what consensus treatment plans are. They're like a limited set of treatment approaches for a given problem that the pediatric rheumatology community agrees is reasonable. So if you see these pie graphs with all these colors, on the left 2 ones are steroids, corticosteroids, and the right 2 are methotrexate. And this is for a disease called scleroderma. And they ask the question, what are people doing? And the current practice, the top 2 graphs are where there's a bajillion different wedges in that pie, are all the different ways people are treating, using steroids or using methotrexate. And we said, okay, gang, let's see if we can decide on just a few options. And through a whole formal consensus process, we came up with For the steroids, just 3 options, and for the methotrexate, 1 approach. And we published that, and we've done this for 11 diseases now. And now what happens is that you're starting to influence practice, and all these patients are putting their information in the registry, and then we can actually start to learn what's better. And that's the program that Maria was talking about that we're going to be focusing a lot on the next year. Next slide. This is a new publication. So we did that whole process for polyarticular JIA, and we said, we don't know how to use biologics. We don't know whether we should, there's 3 approaches, 3 CTP options. Step up means you start with one medicine. If it doesn't work, you add a biologic. Early combination means you combine the biologic with something else up front, typically methotrexate. And the third option is you just start right out of the gate with biologic. We don't know which is better. So we made the CTPs, and then we enrolled like 400 patients in the registry and analyzed it. This took a lot of years, but this is really important because what we learned is that, first of all, if you start the biologic early, things do get better faster. But if you look at a year, people catch up. So then there starts to be a question about sort of what your preference is, about how quickly you want to get to getting things better, and what are the consequences of not getting better faster. The other thing is, though, that some people never needed a biologic. So if we had done early combination for everybody, some people would have gotten the medicine they didn't need. So these are the kinds of studies we're doing using the CTPs to help us understand what we should be doing to treat kids. You can go to the next slide. I want to mention how we do patient engagement. So there's this study called LIMIT-JIA, which is looking at a medicine called abatacept and seeing if it can be used to prevent things from spreading, more joints or eye disease. And we were funded by PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute, to do this clinical trial. And we included patients at every step of the process. So sometimes researchers spend a ton of time designing a study, doing a study, publishing the results, just to find out at the end that they didn't study what the patients care about, or they didn't really answer the questions the patients had, or they maybe don't even finish the study because the patients don't want to be part of it. So the idea is to engage patients in the process from the beginning, and designing it, and writing the grant, and developing materials, and that's exactly what we did with this study. Go to the next slide. And we used an approach called human-centered design methods. And this is used not only in healthcare. And by the way, that's Melanie Kohlheim, in case some of you know her, at a meeting we had. So the idea with human-centered design is to say, if you want to develop a solution to a problem in a way that's really in line with what people are feeling and thinking, you need to spend some time figuring out what people are feeling and thinking. And you need to do it in a really systematic, standardized way. And that's what human-centered design lets us do. And we work with actually anthropologists to do this work. So it's pretty cool. I can explain more later if people want to hear more. Next slide. A couple other things we've been working on. One is transition. So kids grow up, they leave the pediatric rheumatologist, and they transfer their care to adult rheumatologists. And we're really interested in making sure that that goes well, because we know it's a really tough time. It's a time when people are becoming independent. It's a time when sometimes insurance lapses. They have to get new providers. These patients are often moving around a lot. They might go to school in a different state. They move out of their family's home. And so we are spending time trying to understand how are people managing that. And this is a publication we had about studying what are all the approaches people are using in terms of their practice, and what are the barriers, because if we can understand the barriers, then we can start to develop new ways of taking care of patients that work. So that's a study about practice. The other thing, this is my nod to COVID and how our world has changed, as Rick said, we went virtual. All of a sudden, we had to use telemedicine in a way that we hadn't done before. And this is a study that came out really looking at, how are pediatric rheumatologists using telemedicine? What works about it? What doesn't? How do we have to change our practice so that it can work better? And so some of our work is focused on not understanding the diseases, but understanding our practice and how we take care of patients. We're interested in all of it. Next slide. The other thing we're interested in is this idea of knowledge translation and implementation science. So this might be shocking, this thing called the 17-year odyssey. So we do research. It's supposed to tell us how to do things better in terms of patient care, but then people need to implement it or follow it in their care. And it turns out that it takes on average 17 years, get this, for only 14% of research findings to be adapted into everyday practice using traditional approaches. So we might have a discovery, but all the doctors out there might not know about it, or they might not be following it because of various problems with following it. And so that's what implementation science is about, is figuring that whole problem out and how can we get new knowledge into practice and to our patients faster. So we formed an implementation science work group, and we held a retreat, which the Arthritis Foundation has been part of, and one of our intramural grants is about actually helping researchers, supporting researchers to study this process. And that's something that we've been able to support thanks to the partnership with the Arthritis Foundation. Next slide. I think this is supposed to say partnering at Arthritis Foundation events. We try to, when the AF has an event, piggyback on it to bring research closer to the patients who are already gathering, whether it's a talk or whether it's disseminating results of research or actually conducting focus groups and actually giving opportunity for patients and parents at Arthritis Foundation events to be participating in research right there at the same event. And that's been really great. Next slide. We also partner in the advocacy space. The FDA has been putting forward these programs called patient-facing drug development meetings, where they bring together all the stakeholders around drug development, including the patients. And so the Arthritis Foundation, obviously, as an advocacy organization, is involved in these kinds of activities, and we've been able to work closely with the AF in these kinds of activities, and to be able to write some of this up. And that's really important as well, to be able to work together in the advocacy space, especially for pediatrics, because there's not enough happening for pediatrics. We've also been very fortunate to be able to offer grants to researchers thanks to the support of the Arthritis Foundation. This is the intramural funding program. So doing research costs money. It costs money to do studies. It costs money to train people. And in the past year, we were able to give out 29 grants of $998,000. Since 2016, they've given out 115 grants to researchers to support their work or to support training. And these grants are all reviewed by a review committee that includes researchers and also representatives from the Arthritis Foundation and also patients. And this has been very, very helpful. Next slide. I think this is my last slide. I just want to end with this idea of not only partnering with the Arthritis Foundation around research, but also in the activities that just plain improve life today. And, you know, the AF offers so many things to make life better for our patients: educational programs, gatherings like camp and JA conference. And this is something that that all the researchers at CARRA have an opportunity through the work they do face-to-face with patients in the clinics all around the country to bring these resources to their patients. And it's a really important part of what the AF is contributing to the pediatric rheumatology patients and to the providers who are taking care of them. Next slide. I think I'm done. Hopefully I saved enough time for questions. Thank you so much. I probably whipped through some of this too quickly, but I'm happy to go back and answer any questions that people have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emily. I'll leave the slides up for just a second in case someone has a question about a particular slide, and we can go back. And then if we don't hear from anyone about the slides, I'll unshare my screen so you folks can see each other when asking questions. Don't forget, you can use your chat feature, or you can take yourself off mute to ask questions. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
Hello. Sorry, this is Michelle Dooner. I'm a staff member, and Doctor, thank you so much for your presentation. I learned so much about CARRA and our partnership this evening. For the parents on the phone, I guess my question is, how do parents get involved in your research studies, your data delivery? Is there a portal for that, or do they have to be invited by a physician?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the participating in the registry that I was mentioning happens at the clinic visit, and it's not every clinic that's participating in the registry. So there's a couple hundred maybe providers. There's a lot of centers around the country where people can see a pediatric rheumatologist. And there's about 70 that are actually registry sites, meaning that those patients at that location can sign up to be in the registry. The reason there's not more is basically just resources. It costs a lot to have a registry, and so we can't afford to do it at every single center, although that would be lovely if we could. The reason why it happens at the clinic and not just like online is that in addition to the information that the patient submits, the doctor submits information. The information that the doctor submits is about their medications, about their physical exam findings, and that is part of what makes this registry so valuable, is that it has what's called physician confirmed information in it, and it's that feature that allows us to get the FDA to approve the use of it for post-marketing surveillance for pharmaceutical companies. So I would say that if patients want to be involved in the registry, they should just ask at their site, their doctors, is this a registry site? And then, try and sign up. Now, if they want to be involved and their site is not a registry site, there are other opportunities to be involved in the whole research process, right? I talked about in study design, and they can either contact someone at the Arthritis Foundation or contact through the CARRA portal through Vincent Delgaizo, who's the patient parent who is the director of patient engagement, and he can connect them with all kinds of opportunities to participate.
We do have a question in chat, Emily. The question is, how close are we to a JA cure or prevention?
Oh my God, they went right to the meat of the matter. Oh boy. Okay. Prevention requires that we understand what causes it, and we're not there yet. I think we're not there yet. I think we're a ways away from that, sadly. And JA is, as I mentioned, a whole bunch of diseases all kind of bunched together into one category. And it might be that we get to the point where we understand, the cause of one particular one, like maybe something that has a genetic cause. And then we might be able to, through, genetic approaches, be able to, prevent the disease or cure it. The idea of cure is once a patient's been diagnosed, and we talk about things in sort of phases. So we say there's active disease, and then there's inactive disease on meds. Some people even use the word remission on medication, but you're not really in remission because you still have medication. So you're just in a controlled state, but you can't find evidence of active disease. That's where a lot of patients are. And then the next phase would be you stop the medicines and it doesn't come back. That's like true remission or cure. And so there's some patients who can get to that phase. But for the patients who are, this question is probably more about the patients who are sort of dependent on the medicines to keep things better, and how long will it be until there's a cure for them. And I can't give you a timeline on it. And again, I anticipate that it will be different for the different subtypes. I want to add one other thing, which is that we think that these conditions evolve over time, and sometimes if you treat them earlier, you have a better chance at cure than if you wait and treat them later. So there are examples of if you can get the medicine into the patient very soon, that you can really dampen down the abnormal processes and the patient can get better and stop medicine and not have recurrence. Whereas if you wait longer, that same medicine doesn't work so well, probably because the underlying process in their body has shifted at that point.
Great, thank you. I'm not sure who asked the question. I didn't look at the chat feature, but I hope that answered your question. Any other questions? We have about a minute or two left. Any questions for Dr. Emily, for Maria, for Rick, for Rochelle? We're happy to answer them at this time, but we will also be, the staff will be available in the coming days, and we'll be doing a follow-up. We'll also send a link of the recording tonight so that if you want to take a look at it again at your leisure, or feel free to share it with your circle of family or friends that may be interested as well. I will do one last call. Any last questions? Great, thank you. I want to thank all of our speakers and presenters this evening. This was fantastic, very informational. We just appreciate it. This is what helps move the education piece about science along in the Arthritis Foundation, and we just thank you all for your time this evening. And we just appreciate you. So have a great evening, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see everybody.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.